This is the Bureau of Lost Culture. I'm Stephen. Before I made the interview, which is today's episode, I sat in my flat in London, and after listening to what you might call a sermon, I picked up a £20 note and I set it on fire. Now, if you would like to know why I did that and how I felt when I'd done that, you're in the right place. Because my guest today is the high priest of the Church of Bern. You could call it, I suppose, a money-burning cult. And thanks to Mark, who put me onto this subject, and to Chris, Andrew, Ronnie, Polly and Bob, who've written recently with suggestions for the show and some support. Thank you so much. Keep them coming. Join us, join them, if you like, for all of our stories at bureauoflostculture.com. In 1984, Serge Gainsbourg, the genius musician, who was also described as a debauched, irreverent, misanthropic, crude, dissolute, alcoholic poet, national treasure and a romantic, lit a 500 franc note during an interview on live television. It was a protest, apparently, against heavy taxation at the time. It's tough being a rock star, isn't it? It was unheard of, though, especially because in France, at least, that was illegal and it caused outrage. 10 years later, on the 23rd of August 1994, the K Foundation, the duo consisting of Bill Drummond and Jim Corti, burned £1 million, that's equivalent to about £2.8 million these days, in a boathouse on the Scottish island of Douro. You may have heard of this. The money represented the bulk of the funds that they'd previously earned in their band, the KLF. But these aren't the only examples of money burning. Music producer, Killing Joke bass player Youth told me on a previous episode how before the KLF burned their money, he burnt some money as a sacrificial rite near the Thames in London after coming down from a horrendous acid trip. As we're going to find out, this sacrificial rite, let's call it that, has become the central act of the Church of Bern. Now, I expect you might have a whole range of reactions to this. Listeners of this programme, I suspect, will be at the very least curious, but you might find it outrageous, you might find it comical, you might find it immoral in some way. But maybe if you do, have a listen to what my guest has to say. I have found it completely fascinating to dig deep into what money means for me, for all of us. Jon Harris, once a pornographer, the ex-tour manager of bands such as Killing Joke, is now High Priest of the Church of Bern, publisher of the Money Burners Manual and the Burning Issue magazine. And he came to the Bureau to tell me why one would burn a £20 note. Because I did it because Jon suggested that I do it, and it had quite an interesting reaction. So, welcome to the Bureau of Lost Culture, Jon.
Well, thank you very much for having me here, Stephen. I'm really pleased to hear that. Yeah, that's great. You didn't record the serial number by any chance, did you?
I did.
You did, fantastic.
I took a photograph of the note before I burnt it. And just to sort of fill up the information, it was actually a Scottish £20 note, because as I spent half my time in Scotland, so it happened to be what I'd got with me. You'd suggested that I listened to the piece that you'd recorded.
The sermon, you mean?
The sermon. You suggested that I might want to have a note handy, which I did, and I set it on fire. And you probably heard this a million times, but I had quite a mix of emotions, a bit of guilt, or quite a lot of curiosity, I think, and a dash of liberation. Yeah. There's a lot in it, isn't there, burning money? I mean, you've made a religion out of it. Let's go back to the beginning, before 2007, when it started for you, your first burn. Who was Jonathan Harris?
He was a guy looking for something, I think. Money's always been a really key thing for me. Money and sex are my kind of two drivers that throughout my life. I don't just mean sort of as things I've pursued, although I've done that as well, but I mean sort of intellectually, my curiosity. So I had a place at Warwick when I was a teenager to go and study philosophy. I got sidetracked trying to make my way in the world, which involved first forays into the sex world, with a British version of Playboy called Electric Blue. I was the first person to get them into mainstream shops, like the R-Price video shops. I don't know if you remember.
So what was your role in that?
My company did a deal with Electric Blue and set up this company to distribute these videos.
Then soft porn videos.
They were softcore. They were around that time when it made it much easier for places like HMV and Our Price to start selling 18 rated videos, and they did sell them. They sold loads of them, and I ended up then going to university. I went to the London School of Economics. Was completely fascinated by money. That's what I want to study. What's the closest thing? And the closest thing I could get to was economic history. Didn't quite scratch the money itch for me. But I've been scratching that ever since in my own way.
When you were a kid, you were really interested in coins, weren't you? And you
had coin collection.
Old coins, because you could sort of hold them and imagine all the hands that they'd passed through. And you had this particular penny, didn't you? Which had sort of shrapnel or something?
Buckshot, I think it was buckshot. So somebody had shot it with a shotgun or something. In my mind, when I used to hold that had saved a soldier's life or something.
Because that was to seed what was to come in some ways. I thought.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I've been that thread throughout my whole life. When I say money, I don't mean economics. I mean money specifically. So the philosophy of money, the theology of money, the metaphysics of money. When there's a financial crisis, it's a very rich time for academic writing about money. So fortunately, 2008 we had this massive crash, and since then we've had some of the best work on money ever written. So David Graeber's Debt, Nigel Dodd, The Social Life of Money, and I think that's possibly why I've chosen the path I have. There's a visceral, embodied element to money that's obviously the area that I've kind of focused on.
Let's get you from studying economic history to 2007.
When I left the London School of Economics, my tutors were keen to me to do further study, become an academic. But I also had the opportunity to start a sex site called Natural Sex. It was a no-brainer. That was what I was always going to do. So I did that, and that was an amazing experience and quite joyous. I did that with my ex Sally, and we had a great time. The idea I had was basically like OnlyFans is now, and this was in 2000. So well before Facebook. We got on the telly and all talked about our sex lives a lot to journalists and stuff like that. Learned an awful lot. Made some money for a short while, but couldn't make it last. We went bankrupt in 2007, which is when I first spent money, so there's obviously a connection there. Great times, but also very tough, very hard times. Had a kind of mission, a kind of purpose. I was keen to do things differently, to do kind of ethical porn. So not softcore, it was aesthetically, it was pornography. But try to do it in a way that was fair, just right, really. And I think we achieved that. We won an erotic award in 2002, which I'm very proud of. One of those golden cocks from Tuppy Owens. That was fantastic.
You've still got it?
Sally's got that. She was the brave one because nobody's ever questioned me about it. I could put my face out there. It's not a problem. Hopefully changed now. But back then it was a different thing. It was a brave thing to do back in 2000 to put your face to something like that.
So you went bankrupt, and bankrupt's an awful thought, this idea that you're sort of ruined or something, I suppose. Would have said in Victorian times, right?
Yeah.
But you respond to it by burning a tenner. You said that you could have argued that tenner really belonged to my creditors, not to me. So it actually burned someone else's tenner.
It literally did. At the same time, it never felt more like my tenner than any tenner I've ever had.
Because it was your last tenner in some ways? Or?
Yeah, because I'd kept it in my pocket for a few weeks beforehand. I'd actually thought about burning money since the KLF did their thing in '94. I'd been in my mind, and it was one of the factors that sent me to the LSE.
So the KLF burning £1 million was a sort of signal moment for you then, was it? Right.
Yeah, definitely.
Did you sort of intuitively understood why they did it?
No, not really.
No, because they don't understand why they did it either. No. I saw a film recently, a new film about the KLF, and they're interviewed about it, and they said, we don't know why we did it.
I was stuck on a train with Bill for 3 hours, so I've had a good chat with him about it. Yeah, and it's still a mystery, really.
And it was really brave of him, I thought, to go on this tour. Yeah. And then just to get sort of, repeatedly heckled, without being able to have a cogent explanation, And they were trying to work it out themselves. Their answers were changing all the time because they're trying to work it out. And actually, I think it's Corty actually sort of says, how am I going to feel? One of my kids, needs a life-saving operation. I haven't got the money to do it. There is this whole thing about the future somehow, isn't there? A debt to the future.
Yeah. Bill told me that the thing for him was when his kid came home and from school, and he said, "Dad, somebody told me at school you burnt £20,000. You didn't really do that, did you?" And he went, "No."
But it provoked something in you then, mystery or not, right?
Thought that went through my mind was particularly around what is money, the philosophical questions of money. When you get into sort of academic writing on money, money becomes this unreal thing. It becomes a social arrangement, really. And me having that entrepreneurial background, I think that I was much more in tune with the idea that money has a reality to it. You can make all those statements about money being a social arrangement and it just being figures on a bank's computer, all of which are true. But if you take £1 million and you burn it, then you really understand what money's about. It still has a profound effect on me. It's it was a major thing. Jon Higgs described it as the magical act that brought the 21st century into being. And I think that's a really clever way to put it. Yeah,
and it's good to put it into context as well, because an anarchist, Dave Lee, 1971, he burns a fiver, which then was quite a bit of money, wasn't it actually? And the KLF burning £1 million, youth who is interviewed in here by Jon Higgs, of course, had burnt money himself earlier, hadn't he, in London, and he told me about that when he came here, and coming down from some horrendous acid trip, he sort of almost like instinctively burnt it on his way to the Thames, kind of ritual sacrifice. So there is this kind of like tradition, I mean, that could go back through time for all we know, isn't it?
I think it does. People put coins in the foundations of buildings. The Temple of Mithras, they found coins going back years, and we tend to conceptualise that, I think possibly because of the way we are with money now, as people saving money from marauders, so they're putting in a pot and burying it. But there's ample evidence to say, no, actually, these were sacrifices.
Oh, kids throw coins in wells, don't they?
Yes, it's always gone on. It's not surprising to me that ritual sacrifice has sort of attached itself around money. You used the word totemic earlier. That's where those ideas come from, is you end up sacrificing the totem as the replacement for the human life that you would have sacrificed.
But it's got to be something that you value in some way.
Absolutely,
right? And it's got to sting a bit, right?
Yeah.
In your instructions about the amount you should burn, don't burn too much, because you find it difficult to understand what you've done.
Yeah, you get numb.
You get numb. And if you burn too little, the pain of it won't register. You should only be burning £5 if you're homeless and hungry. This is good. The greatest mistake in thinking about how much to burn is to conceive of it in terms of value for money. If you find yourself thinking, what's the most cost-effective way I can have the money-burning experience, cheapskate, there's no point in doing it, right? So, and I like this too, the amount you should burn is equivalent to the desire that money could fulfill in a moment, like an impulse buy. When I burnt the £20 note this morning, there was the guilt thing, and I thought, I'm just going to think through this guilt thing, right? Because if I'd gone out, spent 20, 30, 40 quid getting hammered, then this morning I might have a hangover, but I wouldn't feel guilty about it. And so why would I feel guilty about burning it? I mean, it was a strange thing.
I think that's one of the important things that we do in the ritual, is to take people through that process. And I always say to them is to take those things with you. So if you think, oh gosh, I don't think I should burn this, I think I should give it to charity, there's people in need. Don't just ignore that as a feeling. Take it with you into ritual, burn through it. You end up understanding a lot more about money and your relationship to money because of that experience. Why do you feel guilty? It's like it's a strange thing. Certainly my own personal experience is that I'm more generous, more likely to give a tenner to charity, which I don't do that often, after I've burned money. We hate to acknowledge it, but money has a really strong hold over us psychologically. And if any way of shaking the chains.
If I had said, hey guys, I went out and got pissed last night, nobody would be thinking, well, you shouldn't have done that. You could have given it to charity. But when you say you're burning money, then the response is that's immoral in some way.
Yeah, yeah. It is always around those questions of morality as well. You're going into a strange area when you're doing it. I mean, I don't know I've got all the answers to it. I've got my personal experience to go on, what it feels like to burn money, where it takes me. And I've also been in the very fortunate, privileged position of having other people do it and tell me about their experiences of it. It takes you in a visceral way through that argument of why do I feel guilty? Because at the end of the way, when we say guilt isn't an intellectual thing. It's an embodied feeling that you've done something wrong and you should feel guilty about it. And you need to do something that's embodied and visceral to understand what's going on there. It belies this argument that money is a purely rational, intellectual thing.
God, no, it's totally emotional.
Yeah, it is, yes.
Keith Richards, how much was he shot into his arm over the years, right? Millions of quid probably in smack, right? But nobody sort of like says to Keith Richards, you selfish bastard, you could have spent that on the NHS or something, do they? Or well, maybe we do, but he's a rock star, so he's kind of allowed to do that, isn't he? But burning a tenner, burning 20 quid, it's this transgressive thing.
It is
and that's why it's
transgressive,
so
yeah.
interesting, because it feels, I said, what you've been doing through the Church of Bern, which is kind of in a way expressing it through the rituals. It does feel deeply countercultural to me, because money is the culture. We live in the culture of money, right? And so to burn that, deliberately destroy it, feels very countercultural.
Exactly right. And the word you use, transgression, that's totally it's a transgressive act. It definitely goes against the whole way we are in the world, and this kicks back against that. It's a renunciation of money in a sense, if in sort of theological terms.
What is money?
Oh, well, how long have you got?
Because it's in the news all the time, isn't it? In a way, but not in the way that you talk about it. I mean, the books that you sent me, the Money Burners Manual and these publications, Burning Issue. Money, it becomes this whole psychological, mythological, philosophical, totemic thing.
Yes, totally. Totemic is a great word for it.
Quite separate from currency, I suppose. That's the thing.
Currency is the material world stuff, and money is a much bigger subject. You'll often find that the two terms are used interchangeably as if they mean the same thing. Plainly, we mean different things when we talk about them. That's why we have different words for them. What is money? Tried to answer this question for 25 years. Lots of other people who've tried to answer the question. This will make no sense to anyone, but I think money is the movement between determinacy and indeterminacy. One of the key qualities of money is it gives a definite value to things. That seems to be its ability. It's also able to combine oppositions and meld things together. It used to be, Wehrgeld used to be the thing where some guy had murdered some guy in the village, and there was going to be an all-out war between the families because
unless that person coughed up.
Yeah, exactly. Convert it into a monetized debt, and all that pain and hurt and anger and violence would be given a figure in gold.
The death became a debt.
Yeah, the debt would be paid. Money has this amazing ability, and whatever quality you say about money, whatever you say it does, it always seems to be able to do the opposite and have the opposite quality as well. One of the greatest works on money was Philosophy of Money by Georges Simmel, and one of the key things he said was that money is ambivalent. Probably why it's really difficult to give an answer to that question. And
there's lots of ways of seeing it, I suppose. Well, we bartered, and then we needed convenience, so we invented some intermediate thing to... This is currency, isn't it, really? So first gold coins or shells or whatever it is, and they had some value themselves, but then we represent the value with just a note. And as today, as I was burning that 20 quid note, and with its number on it, and I thought, well, what does this actually mean anyway? What is this piece of paper which represents something, and a number that represents something, and I guess it represents some value to me, or no, it's been burnt. Has that value been lost?
Well, exactly. That's a good question. So on the barter thing, there'll be plenty of people who disagree with that story of money. I think it's partially true.
This is a sidebar about the barter myth, and thank you to YouTuber One Dime for educating me in this respect. Try imagining life before money. It's pretty hard, isn't it? The conventional story that we just discussed about the origins of money, the one that we've always been told, is that humans started off with bartering. I give you my sheep, you give me some wheat. And then we started to use commodity money such as gold or silver, precious metals, because it was more easier and convenient. And then we moved on to notes and credit cards. This story was popularised by Adam Smith, father of economics, and it's the story which is still told to this day by economics textbooks and professors. But here's the problem. There's no anthropological evidence that any ancient society based its economy on bartering, and there's an enormous amount of evidence which suggests the opposite. Now, this doesn't mean that bartering itself didn't exist or still doesn't exist. It just never took place on the universal global scale that people thought it did. Having an economy based on barter doesn't even make sense. A bartering transaction can only really take place if both parties have something that the other party wants or needs, or regards as having a similar value. Let's imagine a scenario where we have, on one hand, a baker who's got the wheat, and on the other hand, a butcher who's got the meat. But what if the baker doesn't really want the meat or doesn't like that particular meat? The butcher then would have to try and find somebody who did. And in the meantime, the meat might be going off. So, if the barter story is a myth, then what are the actual origins of money? Well, some people believe that money was no more ever invented than music or mathematics or writing, and that what we call money isn't a physical thing that was invented like the light bulb or gunpowder. but that money is just a way of comparing things. And this thing that we call money is probably almost as old as human thought itself. In fact, there is evidence of money existing as far back as writing. The earliest found evidence of writing was actually about money. It was about keeping track of transactions and details of debts. Writing wasn't invented by poets. It was invented by accountants, as far back as we can find evidence for. All forms of accepted money used in organised societies were issued and overseen, managed by some form of state or authority, trying to keep track of debts. Another huge misconception is that we started out with commodities such as gold bullion and then we had paper money. And then in the 70s, according to Richard Nixon, we went off the gold standard. And ever since, we've just had this virtual fiat money, not really backed by anything at all. The narrative basically is that money is getting faker and faker, and that crypto is just the latest example of that. But virtual money is not a new thing. We didn't begin with barter, discover money, and then suddenly develop credit. It happened the other way round. And what we now call virtual money came first. Coins came much later and never really completely replaced that written form of accounting.
But let's go back to you being bankrupt and burning the tenner. Well, first of all, what made you think I'm going to burn a tenner? And secondly, when you did burn it, what did you feel like?
I'd been thinking about it, I say a couple of years, but, it'd been on my mind for as long as I can remember. And every time I came to do it, I would be like, yeah, but not this time. No, I can't do it now because, I need the tenner on. And eventually, I think it was because of the fact I'd been through this whole natural sex thing, and that had been my big life project, and I felt like it was mine and Sally's contribution to the world. It was very painful when it ended, and I was slightly adrift. And the only other thing I had that was kind of on a par with sex was money in my kind of world. And I wanted to find a way of getting back into it. And I was already felt that it wouldn't be sufficient just to return to academia to write about money, that it wasn't the right course for me. For 2 years before, I'd kind of thought, I'm going to do this. And eventually I put in my head this date of the 23rd of October, which was my money burning day. My birthday's on the 19th of October. And I knew that most economic crashes, stock market crashes, for some reason, happen around that time of year. Once I'd set that date in my mind, I would become a failure if I hadn't burnt it. And I ran out of excuses. The fact that I'm sat here now, all these years later, talking about this tenner shows you how, it's...
Because you recorded the number, didn't you?
No, I didn't, because I just wasn't thinking about that. I just did the thing and experienced it. I didn't know where it would lead. I didn't think it would lead anywhere, but I just wanted to do it. The thing that was immediately apparent to me when I did it was that I was involved in a ritual sacrifice. It was a ritualistic act. I knew that, and I hadn't set it up like that.
So what was the actual context that you did it in?
I went up to my bedroom to do it. Sally and my son George were present. I lit a candle. I think I said something, but I know I felt the urge to say something equivalent to a prayer, if you like, as I lit the note. Yeah.
And what did Sally and George think?
George immediately wanted to burn his money, and I said, no, just don't just follow your silly old man into it. No, Sally was fine with it. She's a very open-minded girl, but as time went on and I carried on burning, it became a little bit of an issue because obviously we'd been bankrupt, we were skint, we had gas bills to pay, we had this. I burnt once a year, but what I did is I set myself this really stupid plan, doubling the amount I burnt every year. So that lasted 3 years. I burnt at 50. When I was down to burn 100, I chickened out of that one and then eventually went back down to 20. I was also aware that it was me kind of trying to use the magic of it to create some effect. And it took me a few years to work out that it's a completely non-transactional thing is what you're involved in ritual sacrifice.
Right, so just to elaborate on that, you've said that you don't do this to get something.
Yes.
Right. It's a ritual which is the end in itself. So it's not like I'm going to burn this and I'm going to get something back somehow, some mysterious power or some satisfaction. It's the actual burning, the actual ritual itself.
It's a really tricky thing to get across to people. When we do the Church of Burn stuff, we try not to promise people something. I usually say that the only thing you get when you burn money is nothing. You'll get nothing for it. We can talk about nothingness, the divine nothingness, because of the way we're formed around money. we always have this idea that it's a transactional thing. I went to Treadwell's in town here and years ago and did a little goddess ritual, and I was amazed how transactional the language was, that you do this and the goddess gives you this. This isn't my take on things. That transactional relationship we have with gods is really a wrong way to think about things. I mean,
so you propitiate the god in order to get some blessings, some...
Yeah, people still call what I do an offering. It's not an offering.
It's a sacrifice.
So we have a goddess, Melusine, and what we say is that she wants you to sacrifice your money, but she wants you to do it so you're worthy of her presence. So you experience that loss, and by experiencing that loss, that conscious loss, you become better in the world. And then the gods will come and bless you with their presence. I think that's a better way of thinking about the world because...
But surely even that hope to be better in the world is some reward for...
Yeah. One of the key phrases that I always take with me through everything I do with Church of Bern is at the centre of creation is not purity, but purification. So I think you've got to have this kind of pragmatism about all this stuff because at the end of the day, we're humans living in the material world. So I think you're right. You can take the sacrificial logic to extremes and you can end up at a point of extreme asceticism, that you should earn to burn. And that charity is a terrible waste because that's good money that should be burnt,
Just before we leave the tenor in that state of bankruptcy, the great loss of that, particularly if it's an endeavour which you've thrown yourself into as you necessarily had, and had high hopes for, and then it's kind of all crashed and burnt. In fact, you've got no money, you've got creditors, etc. It's like you've been stripped somehow of your kind of currency. It does feel like a very defiant, significant act to do that, to burn the tenor, because actually, I'm guessing for most of us in that situation that we will be anxious and obsessed with the notion of money. So to take a kind of deliberate creative act and burn some is like a kind of defiant thing to do, isn't it?
Petulant, even.
Petulant, yeah.
And there was certainly a lot of people said that about the KLF. That there was a kind of petulance to it. Yeah, I think that's probably true. And I think reclaiming something of myself and being defiant to money and not letting it dictate your entire life. But I mean, in terms of bankruptcy itself, I wouldn't recommend it. But going through the process, you are aware of how ritual sits at the centre of that. I took the opportunity to go bankrupt in the Royal Courts of Justice just down from the London School of Economics. So you walk through these wonderful halls, sign these bits of paper, and the whole thing is ritualistic.
You've mentioned a few times now Church of Bern, its publications and its rituals, and that implies that there's a community of people who are doing this. So just take us from burning the tenor to religion.
Go for a religion. Sounds bigger than it is. It's hard not to believe in magic after this, the journey that's taken me on, put it that way. Carried on doing it to 2013, and I was writing about it and thinking about it, about money and understanding what it was I was doing with burning money. And then one year I was really busy with my tour management stuff and I barely wrote anything. And I thought to myself, I need to stop this. I need to not do this job. I need to get a rubbish job. So then I can have the free time and mainly the free headspace to do the stuff I did. So that's what I did, is I left that. Then 2013, Sally and I split up, and then, and I was sort of licking my wounds for a while. And then, so when John Higgs, before he wrote the KLF book, he would try to write a book about Killing Joke. And he'd done an interview with youth. He couldn't get the agreement to do the Killing Joke book. So he had this interview about youth burning money floating around. And I happened across John's website. I saw this interview with youth and I was like, I posted a comment. I said, that's amazing to know that youth burnt money, because when I was doing my tour management stuff, I used to drive youth quite a bit, and I drove Killing Joke. I had no idea at the time when I was driving that I wasn't the only money burner in the van. It's quite a lonely thing. Higgs basically responded by inviting me down to a talk he was giving at the Horse Hospital with Daisy Campbell. Do I want to come down and burn money there? Because it happened to be on the 23rd of October, which was my money burning day. Went down there on the 23rd of October 2013. I burnt my 20 quid. And then out of that, some weird magic happened that got to know Daisy, and she's been involved, instrumental really, in the whole group of people, artists and creatives, who've all been involved with it and been interested in it, helped me create Church of Bern.
In that burn at the Horse Hospital, and how did people respond?
Well, I think that was what fascinated Daisy and John. It was, there's a palpable sort of intake of breath in the room. I remember some chap, because it was things were really terrible in Syria at the time, and he shouted out, "What about the children in Syria?" Yeah, there was disquiet. Some people were laughing. Like I think you said it earlier, there is a whole raft of emotion that comes through on these things, and it's not all rational stuff.
So you could say 20 quid well spent, couldn't you, really? I mean, just in terms of, and it sounds ludicrous thing to say, but just in terms of actually, if you're a performer hoping to engage the audience's emotions, their attention and their interest, 20 quid's a pretty cheap price to pay for that, to be honest with you.
It is. But the priest in me would say, oh, no, you can't say that.
Okay.
But yeah, okay. We did a burn at a festival, at Festival 23, and then just after that, I'd never done a ritual with somebody else involved in the burn, right up until 2015. I was keen to do that. I was keen to do it as a sort of a collective ritual. There weren't that many money burners around to do it with. So eventually I found someone who wanted to do it. I went to this woods in Oxford. We did a little ritual where we both burnt 20 quid. And that just blew my mind. I was like, oh, wow, this is it. Because burning money on your own, it can be a really powerful thing. But like any ritual, if it's a collective ritual and you all have that intensity to it, it's just immense. That first order experience of the world and time just flowing around the ritual.
The actual burning is quite brief. So, I mean, is there a kind of ritual context in terms of what you do before and afterwards?
We've done that with Church of Burn, but mostly it's about getting out of the way, I've come to learn. It's about creating an atmosphere, certainly. Well, I used to say lots of words. I don't say anything now. I just use hand gestures and this sort of thing. Really, it's about the participants' willingness to immerse themselves in the moment. When you do that, when you've got fully immersed people, then it's an amazingly powerful act. And
do people, do celebrants, participants, congregation, whatever you want to call them, discuss it afterwards? How?
Everybody wants to talk about what their experience was, so they do. I tend to be, and I always try and encourage people to write to me and tell me what their experience have been. I think one of the common threads is this word lighter, that people feel lighter afterwards. Maybe that's to do with that guilt thing of going through that guilt thing. Can
I just say something?
Yeah.
I've not actually gone through it yet.
Haven't you?
Still feel quite guilty about it. I can feel it. It's really interesting because it keeps coming back, Yeah. As we're talking, I'm thinking, yeah, it's a great thing to do. And it's like, then the sort of guilt sneaks back in. It's really weird. So, how much money have you burnt?
I haven't added up. I would say 800 odd quid, something like that, coming up for 1,000 quid over, since 2000. It's not that much money. If I had a hobby, I'd be spending a lot more on the hobby.
Yeah, right. More people have been drawn to this, and not only the actual ritual, but you've been publishing as well.
Yeah.
I mean, the Money Burners Manual. And it's a very deep dive into the subject. I was fascinated by the stuff about money before we even got to the burning bit, And you've formalised certain kind of recommendations, some rules actually.
My 3 rules. Yeah, I'm not a man who responds well to rules, but I was trying to find my way through it. So I think it's got to be your own money is the first thing. It's got to be enough to hurt a little bit. And never tell anyone to burn their money. Yeah.
Right, yeah. Which seem like 3 very sort of socially responsible rules.
Yeah. Never turn anyone to burn their money was kind of like a self-defense mechanism for me, so I didn't become too annoying for people by trying to encourage them into it. So it was something that I was stopping myself from doing, because I think that if you put pressure on people to do it, then you're not going to get the experience. You need to come to it of your own volition, really, to fully experience it.
Reading the burning issue, how it is in the culture as well. This guy, J.S. Boggs, he didn't actually burn money, but it was quite interesting, his story, wasn't it? Because he was an artist who drew money, right, and then used that money as a means of exchange, and then was getting prosecuted. I mean, just tell us his story.
He was an amazing artist. What he used to do was he'd go into a restaurant. I think the first time he did it, he went into a restaurant. He didn't have the money. He didn't have any money, so he drew a banknote. And he offered it in payment, and it was accepted in payment.
Because he's a great artist.
Yeah, he was a great artist. And eventually this became his thing. And what he would do is he would draw a note, and he would, in that sort of situation in a restaurant or buying something, and he would say to the person, if you want to accept this note, I've got a collector who's willing to give you a lot more money than the meal cost. And they'd say, yeah. So then he would put out the word, and the collectors would go around and they'd buy this note. So it was a kind of game, really. Very subversive. In the late 80s, I think, and he had a show in London, and the police raided it and tried to do him for counterfeit, which is a serious a serious charge. It's like jail time and very serious.
Well, back in the day, you get hung, drawn and quartered for clipping money, right?
Yeah, and he was put at the Old Bailey. A very famous barrister around then defended him, and he said that only an idiot in a hurry would confuse Boggs's notes with the real thing, and then the case was thrown out after that. But it shows you how sacred money is, the form of money is within society. This is not that long ago in the grand scheme of things, the late 80s.
Right, no, not at all. I mean, also the thing I remember was Serge Gainsbourg burning a note.
The 500 franc note.
500 franc note in the interview, which caused absolute outrage, didn't it? Gainsbourg's thing by that time, or Gainsbourg as it became, was actually causing outrage, but he did it on TV.
Our attachment to notes and physical money does seem to be fracturing a little. That's become very prevalent now because of cryptocurrency, because of the fact that we're moving to electronic money. So it's definitely time to burn the stuff now, because I think the generations that are coming are not as used to physical cash, that
because it's a threat in a way to Church of Bern, isn't it? Crypto. I was going to ask you about it, because how would you destroy it, crypto? Because it's not even held in one place. It's not like it's on a computer drive somewhere that you can go and break in and smash up. It's actually on this infinite network, isn't it? So crypto itself, which is the kind of next logical stage of currency, maybe not of money, become more and more kind of abstruse in some way and out of reach. Can you burn crypto?
Well, somebody already has. Geraldine Juarez, who is an artist, she burnt some Bitcoin early days, and she put it on a little hard drive and then burnt it. So it's actually very similar to the Bank of England. So when you burn a £20 note, you're burning your claim to that value. The record of the value, I should say. Right. The record of the value still exists in the Bank of England. So
they've still got the serial number.
Yeah.
So potentially, could they reprint it?
Don't think they'd reprint it, but it's still listed as a debt on their books.
This is a sidebar about how much money the Church of Bern has recorded to have been deliberately burnt. Of course, this doesn't represent what might have actually been deliberately burnt, or in fact, of course, what has been accidentally burnt during history. But the KLF's £1 million back in 1994 was surprisingly not the largest amount that has been recorded as being deliberately burned. Adjusted for inflation, that place goes to US Marines who, in 1975, burnt $1 million in cash under the instruction of an official at the US Embassy in Saigon. This was revealed in the 2014 documentary Last Days of Vietnam. The task took 8 hours, during which time the soldiers were locked into a room with the burning cash, and the action was taken to prevent the money falling into the hands of the North Vietnamese army. In August 2008, Sam Eden, who was the chairman of the Niger Delta Development Commission, a Nigerian government agency, became involved with Parabakowe Oga, a self-proclaimed sorcerer to whom he gave significant amounts of money. In a statement to the police, Oga described a midnight fortification ritual in August 2008 at the Port Harcourt Cemetery, which involved Sam Eden burning 270 million naira and then rubbing the ashes over his body. 2 sisters in Pakistan's Punjab province withdrew 1.7 million rupees from their bank. They then burnt the money on the street outside, brandishing a pistol to prevent interference. On the 6th of July 2010, in a publicity stunt to bring attention to the gender pay gap, a Swedish feminist party publicly burned 100,000 Swedish krona. The money represented the sum Sweden's women miss out on every minute in comparison to men. So, adjusted for inflation since the burns were originally made, the total that the Church of Bern has recorded as being deliberately destroyed is £7,254,885.
The way cash came about was because the bank used to issue checks. The Bank of England used to issue checks, a bit like bankers' drafts today, and people would spend them. Then they'd return to the bank, and the bank would mark them as paid. So the cash would then be withdrawn from circulation. So then that value would get etched off the book in the bank. But of course, that doesn't happen with cash now. I've written to the Bank of England, said, I've burnt this note. you might want to know because you want to adjust your books.
What did they respond?
Nothing, no. Sadly, I would love them to. This idea of playing with money, I think, is really important for artists to play with money in this way.
Yeah, and it's not illegal even to deface money, is it? Is that right?
No, it is illegal to deface money, yeah. And there's lots of artists now. The money defacement movement is huge now. There's been lots of shows about it. There's one at the Serge Gallery.
Right. Let's dispel another myth, actually, which I meant to earlier on, which is that because one of the myths about money is that it's illegal to burn money. That's not true, is it not?
Not in this country, no.
It's a massive area, but, isn't it bizarre that, in recent years we've heard this thing called, money printing, which in the past would have been literally pumping out notes, and it's just adjusting a figure in a computer.
Yeah.
We've invented another £1 billion, which we're going to use to pay people during COVID or whatever, right? We just invented it. It's so kind of disconnected from actually our experience of money in the way that you were talking about that it doesn't make any sense to us anymore at all, does it? But if you're actually holding a note and holding a flame to it, it's a kind of much more, as you said, visceral connection.
It is a visceral. There's a connection between our individual relationship to money. All of that feeling you're talking about, that's what it's based on. There is a tendency to abstract from it and to talk about money in terms of figures in banks, computers, and it being these institutional arrangements. But I think the heart of money, the soul of money, is in our relationship with it. There's a saying from a guy called Jacob Needleman, a philosopher, who says that the problem of money is a problem of consciousness. And I think that's really true. That it all stems from that individual relationship we have with it. In Church of Burn's mission, if we can somehow change that, if we can impact upon that, then it will have a wider impact.
What is Church of Burn's mission?
Change money by changing our relationship to money.
How's it going?
I've had just the best time doing it. 2016 was the first one where I saw the possibilities of this. One of the people that you've talked about on your show before, Ethcott Williams, he had a poetry night at the Cockpit Theatre, and it was poetry can fuck with this, can fuck with that. And Daisy was doing them for him. A show she was going to do was called Poetry Can Fuck With Your Finances. And she said, well, let's do a money burning. Ethcott, and he was very thrilled about the fact that we'd be burning money at his night. We've developed it into a synod, a service and a ritual. And that kind of crystallised when we had David Graeber come down and be one of our bishops. But David Graeber's a very famous anthropologist. He wrote Debt, one of the founders of the Occupy movement. He was a bishop in our synod, and the question we gave him was, how do we save the world? And the answer he gave was that we should replace the categories of production and consumption with care and freedom, which is great. Tricky to do. So 2019, I thought, well, this is it. We're going to change the world now. This is because it was so good. It was so amazing. So I made all sorts of plans. And then, of course, 2020, we all know what happened. COVID came along. So 2021, we had a 3-nighter. 2022, we were invited by the Secret Garden Party to go and do one at the festival. Coming into a festival like that without the explanatory and getting to know a stage of Church of Burn and just doing the burn like that and when people are all on drugs and totally up for a party because they come out of COVID, I think we would do it slightly differently next time. But it was still an amazing experience. But since 2022, I've done a few other little ones, and I'm making plans to how I'm going to do it without having to do it at this large scale, because when you do it at a large scale, it costs a lot of money. And then you have the argument that people give you is, why do I have to spend money to burn money? A legitimate thing to ask. The answer is because we want to try and give you that experience to help you have that immersive experience of doing it, to put you in that place. We're all experienced ritualists and celebrants and theatricals and creatives. And I hope we do a good job of taking people to that place that they can really let themselves go and experience it as what it is, a ritual sacrifice.
How much money would be too much for you to burn?
First time I burnt at 50, that was a bit ouch. That was a bit too much. There is a sense where you have to force yourself through it. But the problem with doing that is you can take that too far, and I think that's what happened with the KLF when they burnt £1 million. You don't really experience the pain then. So there's a sweet spot. So for me now, 20 is good. 30 or 40, 50 is a little bit too much for me. Having said that, if it's a really significant burn for some reason, maybe I've come into some money somehow, then 50 would be it. Unless you're really rich, in which case you've got a problem.
Yeah, because a 20 would be nothing, right?
It's an interesting switch around, really, because I had this phrase, pity the rich, the poor burn. I think it's true, because when you're rich, you don't have that capacity to have the same experience as I do, burning a 20 quid a note. And that's a shame for them, really. It can be an amazing thing to do.
How do you generally respond to the, when you're presented with the moral argument, when the guy from the back of the hospital just shouts out, what about these kids in Syria? What's your response to that?
Most often my response is, this is a ritual sacrifice. And I find most people understand that, particularly when they see me do it and listen to me talk about it. They accept that there's a spiritual aspect to this. And that seems to trump the moral argument, if you like.
What is the spiritual aspect to it?
Ritual sacrifice is the original form of communion. You are communing with something that's beyond when you put yourself in that state. I think you could view it as an attempt to connect to the divine or the sacred. People have described it as a religious rite, and that's one way of thinking about it.
I was talking with Einar from Modruna about it, and he said that in the Norse tradition there was this thing about Yuletide, Christmas, which is coming up now, that a table would be filled with the most delicious stuff, but it was just for the gods.
Yeah.
So you had to sort of stand around it, witnessing, maybe your mouth watering and your stomach rumbling, but it wasn't for you. You had to sort of go through that sting of it being a sacrifice.
The Greek god Hestia, all the sacrifices that were made to Hestia were wasted, couldn't be shared. So normally a sacrifice, you'd kill the goat, then you'd share the meat of the goat, but you couldn't do that for Hestia. So if you were worshipping Hestia, you had to leave the meat to rot.
Again, to pass it out, it's like we wouldn't object to the sacrifice of food to the god, whatever our god is. But money occupies this very strange place that somehow then that stepped over the line into some immorality. It doesn't bear any relation to logic. And so, as you said earlier, it's a gut emotional thing. Our attachments to this thing, whatever it is deeply rooted and unconscious.
Yes,
it's far more than we think about. What do I earn and what do I spend? And it's got its tentacles deep in our solar plexus.
Theology has got some great stuff to say about money, because money has that connection with religion throughout. And if you look at the note, this thing is rife with magical symbols. And of course we don't believe any of that these days, and yet here it is. And it exerts this world-destroying power over us,
I never look at the notes in detail, and so I thought, I'm going to really study this note, the symbols on it, and the calligraphy, and the layering of images and stuff like that, and the little silver bit which stops people counterfeiting it. And it is this skin thin layer of deeply historical stuff all squeezed into this thing, right? Well, there is one thing I need to correct in Burning Issue, which is that somebody uses that phrase, money is the root of all evil. The actual original quote is, the love of money is the root of all evil, because money isn't the root of all evil, is it? It's the greed for it, the over-attachment to it.
It's a big one, that the love of money is the root of all evil. I mean, one of the artists in Justine Smith talks about how money is a sheet of propaganda.
What is the staff?
All hail the staff. Well, when we talk about the staff, we always hail the staff, so all hail the staff. Some people have described it in the past as a stick, which is a form of blasphemy. But fortunately, the staff is the source of ever-loving forgiveness.
Does it have a physical presence in the world?
Oh, yeah, it has a corporeal being,
right,
and which is manifested into what originally was termed a stick. If you think about the staff as an immovable object, and then you work around that, that's if I was talking as High Priest of the Church of Bern, which I am, is I'd say we put the mountains of Britain beneath the staff. But basically, got this stick, I don't know where it came from, and I said to my kids, I said, this is my staff. I just knew it was my magical staff. I said, so we're gonna sort of activate it by going to the top of Snowdon and going to the top of Scarfell Pike, top of Ben Nevis. We did that. What happens is you get a venerated object. I listened to the podcast you did on mystics. That was fantastic for me. I agree with so much of what he said, and this thing about things are so important to mystical experience. I have the staff, all hail the staff, and the stone of Thanatos, and all these things which they're kind of portals into that other world. Magical
things. We were talking about relics, weren't we? And how the fact that it may not really be the Jesus's foreskin or whatever is not actually the point. It's actually given its magic by what people bring to it rather than
totally,
and what they try and take from it.
Medieval relics were the first major asset class. The King of France gave over half his income to get the crown of thorns into Paris, and then he spent another load of money on building Sainte-Chapelle as the container, the reliquary for it. They attracted magic and huge amounts of wealth around them as well. It's at the end of the day, it's just a crown of thorns. That's literally it. And there were several of them.
I remember actually, because I grew up in a very Catholic house, and my mum had this kind of card thing with a prayer on the back, but it had a splinter of the True Cross stuck on it on the front with a piece of sellotape. And it was, at the time when I was a kid, it was a magical object. Later on, you think like that can't be, because there's so many people who've got it. And this cross would have been absolutely vast. But and how did they get it to Bolton? But there we go.
So now, although I appreciate it's just, to some people it's just stick, it's massively important to me. So it's the implement I use within Church of Bern to officiate the actual sacrificial ritual. Then this whole way of talking about it and thinking about it has been really, really instructive about our relationship to magical objects and things which we talked about earlier. It's been massively important. It's been and highly educational. I recommend everybody should try and get a staff, although there is only one true staff. The High Priest of the Church of Bern is the holder of the staff. It's my privilege to be the holder of the staff.
You created Church of Bern, and these Burning Issue, the magazine, they're actually beautifully produced things, I have to say. It looks like a lot of money has been spent on it.
Those fabulous artists as well who lent us their work.
What do you hope for next, John? What's the future of the Church of Bern?
I will move heaven and earth to do more of those. The actual sacrificial ritual. They're fantastic things. I've been blessed to have some very, very positive feedback on them, how people feel after they've done it. As you might imagine, getting across the idea of money burning to people in a persuasive way is not an easy thing to do.
You gave me these wonderful books, and I feel like I ought to give you some money, which I'm about to do now. Listen, I'm going to give John a 20 quid note.
Thank you very much.
You can burn that if you like.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I might well do.
By the way, it's not a fair exchange for what you gave me, but I thought symbolically I'd give you a 20 as I burnt one today.
Okay.
And in fact, actually, I only had 2 20s, and I burnt one of them. You got the other one. Thanks very much for coming to the Bureau of Lost Culture, John.
Thank you. It's been an enormous pleasure.
Phew. So, listener, what did you think? I'd be very interested to hear. Did you have a strong reaction to that? Did this conversation outrage you in some way, or maybe perhaps you change your mind, make you wonder, would you ever burn money? I'm not recommending or suggesting that you do. As I said, I still do feel a bit guilty about it. It's very interesting. After I burnt this £20 note, I did give some money to charity. Perhaps to clean my conscience, or perhaps, as John said, burning money can make you more generous. Money's very interesting, isn't it? In these days in particular, maybe sex is no longer so much of a taboo, but money is a taboo in a strange way. I mean, it's very difficult in this country at least, isn't it, to just say to somebody, how much do you earn, or how much have you got? We'd find those questions somehow beyond the pale. Anyway, if you're intrigued by any of this stuff or want to find out more, I've put a link to the Church of Bern website and John's Substack in the show notes. You can check it out. Thanks for listening today. Let's keep listening. And on the subject of listening, I've had several questions about the music that gets played during the Bureau of Lost Culture episodes. Well, it's largely from 2 albums. One is Junk Shop Melodies, which is not out yet. That's going to be out in 2025. And more recently is from an album called Songs for Crow, which has just been released. So if you're interested to know more about that, I'm going to put a link to Songs for Crow in the show notes too. And here is a track from Songs for Crow. It's actually the final track from that album. It's called Requiem for Crow. I will see you, hear you, and meet you further down the road, over the hillsides, and round the bend for more tales from the other side.